Episode 82 of People I Know show. Curt Carstensen today, joined by a previous guest of the podcast, Ryan Vaz, joins me from Willmar, Minnesota, I suspect.
Yeah, right here in our office, in Willmar, Minnesota.
And behind you on the video, I see Barry, the mascot of the Stingers. Ryan, you were a guest about this time last year, sometime late last August, a few days after your season ended.
I think it was very similar, yeah.
A similar thing this year. Last year, the conversation with you was more about the fact that we had this relationship together and working in baseball, and you've been working in baseball for so many years, and you shared some fun stories and lessons from your life. We'll probably do less of that today and more so the fact that I can't imagine of all the seasons you've had, and there's some crazy things that happen in summer collegiate Northwoods League baseball, but you played a season during a pandemic, and I bet a lot of people didn't even realize this was a thing because you had fans coming to the game. So if you can, let's start back in time to when the pandemic was happening and what that was like being an owner and a GM of a team in the Northwoods League, knowing that you'd need your season to have a business.
Yeah, no, it was, the middle of March here in Minnesota, I guess, and really across the country when things started to seem a little uncertain. It was probably, they started shutting down restaurants and gyms and creating guidelines in terms of businesses and how many employees they could have into their business and whether they should work from home. And we didn't, we're a small operation. There's only 4 of us that are full-time with the team, but we didn't really know if we should continue on or if we were supposed to sit at home and work from our laptops. Are we able to meet with businesses? Are we able to call businesses about their ticket plan? Are we even able to invoice businesses for the upcoming season, not knowing whether the season may or may not happen? But at that point in March, we never thought in a million years that the season would be in jeopardy come the end of May. So we kind of joked in the office to say, well, we should be fine. It's the middle of March. We still have April. We still have May. The worst thing that could happen to us is that our sales season for the next 2 months of April and May are reduced, but we'll end up going into operation mode and getting ready for the upcoming season, the 11th year. But other than our sales season being cut short, we should still be able to play baseball. I never thought that this thing would continue to linger on and on and on and on. It was interesting back in May, I think there was a tweet that came out that talked about, will college football be in jeopardy? Same type of thing. We kind of joked, said, come on, college football in jeopardy doesn't start till late August or September. Well, here we are. And now we're talking about winter sports for high school or even spring sports. The University of Minnesota texted me yesterday and said, would the Northwoods League season start early next year if the NCAA Division I baseball season is cut short? We're in September. They're asking if we're going to start our season now in May and start it earlier because they're in fear that their season's not going to happen in its entirety next spring. So
I suppose a concern for the college baseball programs, and you get your players from college baseball programs throughout the country, that if their players aren't going to be able to play for them, they want them to play somewhere so they can keep getting the repetitions and getting better.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the whole idea is thinking about what can they do for these guys if their season is cut short. So as May 15th, the middle of March, hit, they shut down college baseball. And we started looking at, getting the Northwoods expanded the roster because at that point they said, let's make the rosters larger. More guys need an opportunity to play this summer than ever. And so we went and increased the roster size from a 30 to 35-man roster. So we were able to bring 5 more players in for this past season to give more guys the opportunity. But in the middle of March, we didn't think at any time that we were going to be delayed. But as the time went on, as we got closer to June and our opening night was in dilemma, then we started to wonder whether this thing was going to happen at all. And at some point, we got real concerned that maybe we would not have a season, which there are some teams in the Northwoods League that did not have a season, but we were able to pull off a shortened season of sorts with smaller crowds, which just wrapped up last night in St. Cloud. So.
And let's go back to that time where, yes, it was announced that the season wouldn't start on time. and then the uncertainty of whether or not you'd be able to play at all. What were you doing at that time to maybe work with the city of Willmar or some of the other
Yeah.
teams or the league to figure out, okay, we can't have a normal season.
Yeah.
What can we possibly do that is worthwhile of bringing everybody in for? And what were those conversations like?
Yeah, no, I mean, for the months of March and April, you tried to stay away from watching the news because you didn't want to get too caught up into what was kind of going on, but you still wanted to prepare for the upcoming season. Then once we knew that the season was not going to happen, it was going to be delayed, we did a opening night hot dog, chip, and drink at the ballpark for fans to be able to come out in a curbside pickup. So fans were literally driving through the parking lot, and we served 1,000 people in a 2-hour span coming through the ballpark in curbside and delivering food to their car as the home opener. And at that point, we still had no idea. And about that point, we started to get real concerned, and we became a little bit more vocal. We created a video with our mascot as to what would we do if we were given the approval to open baseball in an outdoor venue that gathers crowds. And so we created a video that we sent to the governor's office that ran on KSTP and WCCO in the Twin Cities about Northwoods League baseball and how can it operate safely going forward for the summer. Then what we had was we got the approval on 250 fans, which is kind of probably the bottom of where we wanted to be, the minimum number of fans. Typically, we draw 1,000 fans a game. We were allowed to gather at 250 fans. We said, well, you'll take it. Hopefully the numbers will go up. But at that point, baseball, there was a lot of uncertainty of whether you could actually play the game of baseball with 9 players and whether that was low risk, medium risk, or high risk in the state of Minnesota. Ultimately, what we found out is that it wasn't recommended to play baseball, but we were actually allowed to. But there was so much confusing terminology that nobody knew whether we just got approved for 250 fans, but now you can't play the actual game. So what good is having 250 fans if you can't play the game? And so then the player baseball side of it was approved, and all kind of came together. But it was interesting. We met with the players yesterday. So when June 10th hit, we just set a report date of like June 22nd. And we said, get to Willmar, drive here. You got plenty of time. And we're going to practice for a week. And then we're going to start the season on July 1st. At that point, we did not have approval to actually play games at the ballpark. But it was a little bit of a gamble because we knew that we couldn't wait until maybe July 1 when we were actually probably going to have the approval, because then we wouldn't start until July 15th. So there were guys that were driving all the way across the country to maybe practice in Willmar and then turn around and drive back home. But that was the risk that we had to take, was to have guys either fly in or drive here with not knowing. So at that point, we were working with the state, but also with the local city and the municipalities in terms of being able to get Northwoods League baseball approved. And Willmar was the first city in Willmar that we had approval to actually play the games. And then St. Cloud, Mankato, Rochester, Waterloo, Iowa followed behind so that we could actually create our own kind of division and play baseball.
And you had the first game at home. Was it then on July 1st or a couple days after that?
Yeah, so we started July 1. So the schedule goes July 1 to August 20th is what the season was.
And you played how many home games in this time?
So we played 25 home games in that schedule, 20 road games. So we elected to take 5 additional games on at home that were double headers. So, which in hindsight, maybe we wouldn't have done, because double headers and the pitching staff and still playing every day is a little bit taxing in terms of our pitching staff. But we ended up taking on 5 double headers, and we had 1 rainout. So we ended up playing 24 home games, 20 road games.
24 home dates, maximum 250 fans, where a normal season, what is it, 37?
36, yeah, 36 home games. So we were about 2/3 of the amount of home games, and we're a quarter of the fans.
So I need to ask, financially, for all the effort and time to do everything you need to do to host these games and the expenses of the bats and the balls and the bussing the players around, was it worth it to do this?
Yeah, no, I mean, if you looked at it strictly on an expense standpoint, because once the season started, you pay the coaches, you pay the city of Willmar to use the facility, you pay for all the beer and the soda and all the products, you pay the part-time staff. Quite honestly, our full-time staff are being employed during that period of time. You're paying the bus bill, you're paying the hotel bill, any other expense that you're going to use up your entire bats, your baseballs in terms of equipment. So that was what every team in the league was looking at, is what is our true expense for a shortened season once the season starts. But what people don't realize is that during the off season, you're creating, these partnerships with area businesses, whether it's signage, promotion at the ballpark. We had to operate in order to be able to kind of re-engage with those businesses again and give them the value that they may have already paid for or are willing to pay for to get you to the end of the season. So we owe, there was a lot of promises made to people outside of the season prior that we felt that we needed to fulfill during the summer. And so, there's many reasons of why you play. I mean, number one is hard to imagine not having a season and losing that brand and that experience in the community to take a year off. I think that can be potentially detrimental in terms of trying to create excitement then going into the next year. So we didn't want to lapse in Northwoods League baseball, but there was other reasons as well.
And with the 250 fans per game, how did you manage that? Was there demand for way more, or are there people like me? I thought, like, I've been to a game at your stadium pretty much every year for the last few years. I've kind of lost track, but this year I thought, forget it. I'll let those 250 people that really want to be there, and I'll hopefully show up for a game next year. What was that like, getting precisely 250? Because in the past you could probably be at capacity, over, under, and you make it work. This year, how did you?
It was interesting. Yeah, I mean, when we started out, we thought that one of the reasons why we created these double headers is we thought there would be this huge demand. So let's create more games, more fans, give them an opportunity. And the crowds were very consistent at 250, but early on, some of them were less than 250. And it's exactly what you're talking about. I think people were like, well, I'm a big fan, but I'm just not going to go to tonight's game. I'll give somebody else the opportunity. Or there were some fans that just didn't feel comfortable coming out. And so, July 4th, we're at 217 fans, and you're kind of bummed out. Like, where is everybody? Like, this is our second or third game of the season, and we can't even get to 250. And so you're really jockeying with the numbers to try to figure out, how do you get to 250? How do you not end up at 450? How do you not end up at 150? So, if you handed out, if you sold 250 tickets and 100% of them showed up, piece of cake. But there isn't 100% redemption. And so just because somebody may have purchased tickets, something might have come up. So you have to actually have more than 250 in circulation, and then kind of zero in on how you're only going to put 250 at the ballpark with host families, businesses that bought tickets. So, we were right at that 250 mark. At one point, the state did update the guidelines. We were able to increase the capacity a little bit beyond the 250, but it was at the tail end of our season. But it did help later on in the year to be able to draw crowds a little bit larger.
And I'm familiar with your stadium, and the general plan for games is you have the pretty standard seating behind home plate with the grandstand, and down each of the lines, there's some standing zones and some picnic areas. So both, like, during the game, 250 fans in your stadium, Bill Taunton Stadium in Willmar. Paint a picture of what that looked like, but also I'm curious, I know in the past you'd have these sponsor outings, and you'd have maybe a pregame type of event under a giant tent behind your stadium somewhere. Were you still doing some of those activities?
Yeah. So, I mean, in the grandstand, what we created was separate pods in the grandstand. So there was going to be one of two ways we had to go. You either had to tell every fan when they came in, practice social distancing. If you're not, stay 6 feet apart from somebody that's not your immediate family member. We could have done that, but let's face it, people would have been less inclined probably to follow the rules. And then we would have had certain fans become uncomfortable with other fans sitting too close to where they were at with their family. So we elected to go with a pod system in the grandstand. So literally measuring out certain pods in the grandstand of 2 and 4 seats. So when you walked into the grandstand, you saw over 300, I think it was 320 yellow X's on the seats. And we could only draw 250 fans, but that allowed us because not everybody comes in a group of 2 or a group of 4. So if you came by yourself, you sat on a 2 spot, but 2 yellow X's. Ultimately, that one ticket goes unused, or that spot. So we had to have more pods created in capacity than what we could actually draw. And then as fans came in, they selected where they were going to sit. And if it was a family of 3, and they sat in the 4X pod. If it was a family of 2, they sat where the 2s. And it worked very well because it created the space for the fans in that grandstand on a nightly basis. And then as we got additional capacity, we had separate bathrooms, food and drink in those suite areas down the line. And so that was considered a separate pod that was not with the initial pod behind home plate. So we were able to increase the capacity because they weren't co-mingling, because they had separate bathroom and food and drink in those areas with no real need to go to other parts of the ballpark. So those were the suite areas on the line, were smaller pods, and then the grandstand was primarily where the majority of the fans sat.
And what was your response from some of the fans? Did they feel like this was done effectively? Did you think it was done effectively?
Yeah, you know what? I tried to take a step back. You know, obviously we were wanting to play. And after the first couple of games, you take a look at it, and all of our staff wore masks for the home games. We had hand sanitizing stations that we rented, that we brought into the ballpark for people to use. We limited the number of people that would be in the merchandise stand. That was kind of an open air building for merchandise. We had X's on the sidewalk, so fans wouldn't stand closer than 6 feet apart as they entered the stadium. We had the X's in the grandstand. You're outdoors, which is the biggest key, I think, why we had some success. And I took a step back and said, if you were wanting to be a part of something, this is as safe as any place you can possibly be. You're outdoors, people are spaced out, and we were very fortunate. We didn't have any, outbreaks or any cases of fans that were traced back to the ballpark. But we were outdoors and we played it safe. And we were at 250 people and a capacity of 1,300 at a stadium. So everybody was spaced out accordingly.
And you just mentioned no outbreaks, nothing traced back to you. How much testing was done for the players on your team, the players on the other teams, and like in the city of Willmar? If there was an outbreak, you would have known for sure? There's enough testing.
Yeah, I mean, there's they'll trace all the positive cases. When the season started, we tested everybody, so all the players in the entire league got tested. Then we screened them every single day. So the only time we tested was the very first time when they got here and started practice back in June. As you know, it's been debatable with the whole testing piece to it. We wanted to do the testing to make sure we didn't have any positive cases, but also for the comfort level of the host families. We were bringing in 30 players living with 30 different families. They go to work, they have kids, they have mothers and fathers that live in the area. We wanted to earn the trust of those families by testing the players. And then we screen the players every single day, home and road games, in terms of temperatures, and then a checklist of questions of how they were feeling before we got on the bus or before we played any night, as a screening purpose to it. But we did not test after the initial test in June.
For baseball fans, Major League Baseball fans, obviously their season's very different than normal, but they've had 2 teams very early, Miami and St. Louis, that had a whole bunch of tests. And of course, they're testing constantly. So it's possible that more testing finds more cases that exist,
Correct,
but aren't actually spreading or aren't carrying symptoms. But I'd imagine for you, like in the past, normal seasons, these are young guys, they'd maybe after a game go out, gather, or whatever. What sort of rules did you have in place, and were they effective to keep them together?
There were stronger rules this year than ever. I mean, it was really I think we had to be on the same page when the players got here. They were very, very appreciative in terms of being able to play the season. All but 2 or 3 summer collegiate leagues were shut down across the country. So if you were playing in the Northwoods League this summer, you had an opportunity that just about all other summer baseball players did not have. And so, we had to have a heart-to-heart to talk to them about the trust of the families and not staying over at another player's house. You had to stay in your host family's house every single night. You had to go back to your host family's house. You had to be there. You had to respect the fact and have the conversation with those families that you were playing it safe, and that we were not going to have a slip up and be able to, that was our fear, was that a host family would get COVID from a player. That was my fear. And I thought that would be ultimately one of the worst things that could happen to us. That's worse than even a delay in the season or having to not play a night's game. But there was an agreement. The players, I think, respected the opportunity to play the summer more than ever. We had less guys at the end of the season be tired and have to get back, race across the country to get to school. Most years, these guys play 60 games in college baseball. They turn around, they come to the Northwoods League and play 70 games, and then they got 3 days to get back to fall ball. And so, of course, by the end of the season, they're wore out, and these guys are trying to get 2-3 days off before they start back in college. This year, we had guys that are still in town here in Willmar today, with last night's game being the end of the season, that'll make their journey back. And so they spent more time with the host family as well, because we had more off days, because we played in a 5-team pod. So there was one team in our region that was off every single night, which is a little uncommon in the Northwoods League, that we didn't play every day.
Do you know what the players were doing on those off nights? Because, that's one of the things that probably helps in a situation like the Northwoods League or when young people gather, they want to have fun and socialize. Fewer off days means fewer opportunities to have a day of doing whatever people do when they get a day off. What were the players doing?
I mean, we practiced, I think, all but one or two of them.
Okay.
So we practiced more, and these guys, wanted to get more swings in and do that kind of thing. There was more time spent with their host family. In Willmar, a large part of what people do is, golfing in the lakes area. And so I think there was a really special bond built with the players and the host families this year, more so than ever, because ultimately they had off. You played 5 games and you might have 2 off days, and they end up spending these off days and really being a part of their family versus never seeing them. So I think they spent a lot more time with these families than they ever have.
And besides that, with the more off days, in the past, you'd be busing home from some distant place like Bismarck, North Dakota, or Thunder Bay, Ontario, where this year in your pod it was St. Cloud, Mankato with Willmar, Rochester, and Waterloo, Iowa?
Yep, yeah. So we only stayed overnight 4 nights, 2 nights in Rochester and 2 in Waterloo. So we played whatever it was, 44, 45 games. We only stayed overnight 4 times, which was part of the plan as well, because we didn't want to have a larger number of overnights on the road. We actually put all the players together that stayed overnight for those 4 nights. So these guys stayed consistent in terms of staying with the same. And a lot of times we set them up in the same hotel room. If they live together in the host family, they stay together in the hotel. So we try to, be smart from that standpoint and keep these guys together as much as possible.
Hopefully they all form strong bonds and didn't get sick of each other. I'm sure there's a risk of that too, with how much time you're spending with someone maybe you didn't know until June 22nd when they showed up to Willmar. Yeah,
it's always an interesting summer, because 30 players come in as strangers, and then by the time they leave, these guys are like great friends. And a lot of them will have, friends for a lifetime, and being able to keep in contact across the country. So this summer, more than ever, these guys have had plenty of time.
And I'm curious, as you mentioned, the season for college baseball was cut short. So the caliber of play in the Northwoods League, by them having such a long layoff, but also were there players that, the caliber of baseball in the Northwoods League always is pretty good, but were even more higher caliber players deciding to come to the Northwoods League, or able to come to the Northwoods League because of what had happened?
Yeah, there was guys, with these leagues being shut down, and then we had expanded rosters. We definitely, it'll be interesting to look at 3-4 years from now, how many guys signed pro contracts for how many big leaguers 5 years from now played during the 2020 season. Because there was more guys that threw, mid 90s. We thought the hitters seemed to be more advanced. So there was more players, a larger pool of guys. And we think the caliber of baseball was higher this year than it probably had been in the past.
And I think there's always a risk. Some of these really high caliber players, don't end up coming to the Northwoods League for a variety of reasons. And now that more of them maybe did this year, hopefully that experience leads more of them or their fellow teammates back to the Northwoods League in future years, especially if they found that this was an experience that helped them.
Correct. Yeah, no, I definitely can't hurt. We had a player that was supposed to go to the Cape Cod League. They folded. So then he signed with a team in the Alaskan League, Alaskan Collegiate League. They didn't play. So then he signed, or he was going to go to Eau Claire and play in our league. Didn't sign the contract, but was going to go to Eau Claire. They decided not to play, so he ends up in Willmar. So we were his fourth team that he was going to play for the summer. And he was a freshman at Cal Poly, hit 345 for us this season. Was very, very thankful in terms of being able to actually play. As a freshman, he had a knee injury, had a surgery, and only got like 6 at-bats before March 15th happened. And so this was very it was huge for him to be able to get this money at bats and be able to play. So,
you mentioned Eau Claire. I know they were one of a handful of Northwoods League cities and teams that ended up not having a season at all. I don't know what you can speak of from your perspective in Willmar, but had you not had yours, and we went over some of those reasons why you thought it was important to have a season, but for those teams, what do you think especially would be the big challenges to keep things together for 2021 when there's going to be more uncertainty? Probably the fact that you had seasons and proved that you could do it this year. You can probably have it again next year, I'm thinking, but there might still be some restrictions. We don't know. What would that be like to be a team that just an organization didn't play?
Yeah, you hit on the head. I mean, we have the confidence that we know that we can pull it off. We went through a lot of, crazy days and nights wondering whether we were going to play. And as everybody in the world, I mean, we faced a lot of adversity in the spring and in the summer. So I talk about this whole pandemic is sure good for learning how to roll with the punches and kind of adjusting on the fly. So we did that as we went. For the other teams that didn't have that, I guess they'll be able to use our best practices, so to speak, from this year. But it'll be interesting to see where teams that did not play and were they shut down all summer? Did they have any staff at all? And will they fire it back up in the fall and bring staff back on board and prepare for 21? It'll be interesting to see. And we're kind of in this world now as the season just got over. It's hard for us to realize what the economy is truly like outside of baseball, and have the partners of the Stingers truly been affected going forward in all of these markets. And so it'll be an interesting offseason. But for us, the goal was to get to August 20th and cross the finish line, and then we'll have to create with the next. I'm sure there'll be more challenges ahead as to what we need to overcome next.
Probably challenges for a long time and things you haven't even considered yet, but all of the organizations or the franchises are small businesses, not many people working for the team on the full staff, and even a really successful business in any capacity, many of them are at high risk right now to maybe, if they can just keep enough cash flow, keep it going for the future. But it's obviously when your cash flow comes from these sponsors that pay out in advance and the fans coming to the games, a lot less cash flow. So like with the sponsors, you offer them, you say you're going to be able to provide all these things in a season, and this season you probably couldn't provide everything you had imagined for everybody. How do you handle that?
It was a case-by-case situation, but 99% of the businesses understand exactly what we're going through. So, if your partnership was that you were going to have a sign at the ballpark and have 1,000 fans a game for 36 home games, and that sign was going to be seen by 36,000 fans, 99% of the businesses understand that in order for us to get through this, they have to fulfill their commitment, and that they probably didn't get what they purchased at a reduction of number of games and fans, but they're going to have to continue to be behind us. And so in small markets like Willmar and with the great business partners that we have, I truly feel that we have the advantage from that standpoint, that they truly see the Stingers as a value in the community and understand in order for us to survive, they're going to have to continue to follow through with our agreement. Otherwise, who knows what the next season would look like. So, and that was part of the reason why we played as the time went on. maybe the smart thing to do would have been on March. We joke on March 15th, froze the account, whatever dollars were in the account, not spent another dime, went and got a job on March 15th, and then started back the business up on October 1st. That might have been the smartest play, maybe. But we never thought on March 15th that the season was going to be in jeopardy. If we knew the season was in jeopardy on March 15th, maybe that's what we would have done. Because financially, that probably would have been the smartest thing, is to just freeze everything and then shut down the business and then start it back up. But ultimately, during that time, we were spending money and we had payroll and a lot of expenses in front of us that we had to get past. So at that point, it was either, full steam ahead. We really couldn't look back.
I know one thing you and some of the other teams in the Northwoods League have been able to do in the past is have special events at the ballpark. You mentioned that opening night this year, you didn't have a game, but you had the drive up situation just to kind of have something, because you've learned how to host events during a pandemic and you have the qualifications to have, 250 or more, you said more than 250 people in the ballpark now. Are you considering hosting other sorts of events still to?
Yeah. I mean, the ballpark sits empty in the fall and it's a beautiful time of the year. So we are looking actually at doing potentially an outdoor concert in conjunction with the Chamber of Commerce out at the ballpark. And that might be at 250 or could be at 350 with additional pods. And looking at how else could we use that facility for some non-Northwoods League revenue in the fall to help offset some of the losses that we would have had this summer by only being at 250. And we are kind of looking at some different things.
As you're looking at that, I'm sure you're also ready for maybe a bit of a break at some point here. It probably was one of the more stressful, every season's stressful, I'm sure. But what are you going to do now that you might have a little more time?
It was a whole different type of stress this year. The only time it wasn't stressful is when the game started and the games were being played. But once the games were over or in preparation, it was a completely different stress level. So we talk about doing all these fall events and what can we do, but you're exactly right. We talk about the weather factor and what risks do we have involved with it, and what did we just go through in the summer to be able to give us a breather. There's always a time that you kind of decompress in the fall, and this fall we'll do something very similar. But people say, what in the heck are you doing in the Northwoods League? The end of August and into September, we've got some downtime. And then typically by October 1st, we start putting things in place. So I think we're all going to take a breather. We're going to take a few days away with our families and try to get some rest. But before you know it, become anxious. And then we're right back wanting to start planning for next year.
And can you plan for next year? I mean, obviously, you're going to plan for next year, but it's going to be different than before.
Yeah. One of the things that we said is, we did do some group outings at the ballpark. Those people trusted us to do their group outing at the stadium, and we did a handful of them. We're going to go to those people first and ask them to make a commitment to do a group outing again next year, even if we don't have a schedule. Can we count on you to do that group outing of 30, 40, 50, or 60? We pulled off an event for you in a pandemic. Everybody stayed safe. They had fun. You had food, drink. You believed in us by doing that event. We need your support again next year going forward. Can you make that commitment now? And going to those businesses and then, slowly getting more and more commitments if we can, because the group outings are the toughest part, because that's the part of our business where we're encouraging gathering. And right now we're in that time of, in this world where people are trying to not gather like they used to. And so that's kind of the fine line, I guess.
We're coming up to the end of our time here today, Ryan, and I like to end my episodes with my personal growth segment. And I imagine you can tie a lot of growth lessons into the summer, but maybe there's something totally unrelated. When you think about personal growth and things that you've really improved on or are focusing on that other people maybe might benefit from hearing, what really comes to mind from your life right now?
Yeah, I know. The thing that I through this whole piece, but even prior to that, it's just not, I've become very good at kind of rolling with the punches. Like for 10 years, we had 1,000 fans at the ballpark. We were successful. We won more summer collegiate games than any other team in the country for 10 years in Willmar. And we're not on cruise control, but boy, things seem to feel pretty good. And then I think we've all learned through this experience is that you continue to get punched in the face, and nothing is really surprising anymore in terms of what happens. If you took, every time you faced adversity, if you took that too serious, I think we probably would have all lost our minds through this entire process. And so at some point it almost becomes kind of comical, and you almost, you want to know what the next challenge is ahead of you. You feel it builds, if anything, it builds the confidence that you can overcome just about anything going forward. And so I think without a doubt, being able to spin off of, problems at hand and move on from it is pretty good. I mean, my wife asks me all the time, I don't know how in the heck you get through it, but it just, take it real serious. I mean, all of the problems that are happening are not life or death. And so if you put things into perspective and say, what's the worst thing that could happen? The thing that I thought of through this entire process was, what's the worst thing that could happen? The Stingers could fold. We wouldn't have a team in Willmar. We would go get a job and work for somebody else. That's the worst thing. Now, I know that sounds horrible, but the sun's still going to come up the next day. The first 10 years were so special that I think we would have left and been pretty proud with it. And it just wasn't in the cards for us to maybe do another 10 years. And ultimately that could still happen, but I don't think that it will. But people say, wow, that'll never happen. Well, it could, but that's all right. I mean, we'll figure out a way. There's been chapters in life as to, what one 10-year span will be different than the other. And so we'll make our strongest attempt to make sure year 12 is more successful than year 11, which it'll need to be. But ultimately, that's, from our business standpoint, that's the worst thing that could happen. And, we'll make sure that it doesn't. But if it happened, we would move on. So,
and the variable of course, the virus, which you have some control over, but always less control because you never know who might be carrying it. You seem to, the season's over, you seem to have avoided any catastrophes with that. So of the worst things that could happen, looks like you did well.
So we got through it. Things could have been way worse. We met with our staff and the players yesterday and just said, hey, we pulled off 250 fans for 25 home games. Nobody else in the community took that risk and tried to pull it off. And as you know, by being a sports fan, there's not much sports going on around the entire country that is having gatherings of 25 people or up to 250 people. So it was victories along the way with a finish line of August 20th. And we knew that once we got to August 20th, we could sit back and kind of celebrate in the fact that we were able to pull off some type of a summer. So
one last question that came to my mind. When you're observing a Minnesota Twins game with an empty stadium or the cardboard cutouts, or you're thinking about the Minnesota Vikings coming up, having had 250 fans at your games in a much smaller space, what would you, doing what you've done, what would you advise can and should be done in those situations?
Yeah, it's tough watching those games with the cardboard cutouts. They have capabilities to bring in some fans, I believe. The St. Paul Saints just brought in 1,500 fans with 6 pods of 250. So I got to believe there could be some fans at Target Field. Now, I know they've elected for 0 fans, but, I've always said there's got to be a way to create 10 pods at Target Field and be at 2,500 fans. And then you could charge $500 a ticket, and then you could give 100% of it or a portion of it to charity. Like, you could turn this into a positive by giving, I know that you can't go back to season ticket holders and give them tickets, but there's got to be some way to put some people in those ballparks. We've been able to do it safely. They're all outdoor venues for the most part. There's probably a couple, I'm trying to think if there's any dome stadiums. I think they're all retractable roofs. To be able to give some fans some experience. I know there's reasons behind why they probably don't have any fans, and there's more to it than just opening up and letting in 2,500 fans, and doing it correctly. But it's tough to watch. I mean, it's great that baseball is back. It'll be a fun kind of a postseason, I believe, seeing more teams into it and where it shakes out. But if you're a sports fan like you and I are, it's great to be able to see some type of sports taking place, because for those months in the spring where there was nothing. I can only watch. I mean, now I'm watching the other night cornhole championships on ESPN. I mean, so I started a journal. I've only written in it once, but I'm about 12 pages in to record everything that's happened in 2020. I think it'd be interesting if everybody did the same thing, and then in like 50 years you pulled these things out and you read like what people were going through in 2020, because it'll be hard to believe.
You mentioned some of the weird things you see. Yeah, the cardboard cutouts of the games and no fans. I watch. I'm up during the overnights and I see the Korean baseball organization on ESPN. They have fans there, but they're like sitting by themselves, 7 or 8 seats apart. But
Yeah.
It probably works okay. It's just, can you do it with confidence? Is it worth the risk? The Stingers, It seems like you kind of needed to do something. It was important to keep things going. Major League Baseball probably can take a season off from fans. And
they got the television, so they're able to have the TV rights and be able to do that thing. But yeah, because people asked us, would you play the season if you had 0 fans? And we wouldn't have played.
Yeah, that would make sense.
There just would have been way too much risk, way too much expense. As much as we want to give these players an opportunity to play that hadn't played since March, financially we wouldn't be able to pull it off to have no fans in the stadium. So that's why the 250 made sense. We were hoping to be able to go up, but it didn't happen. So we made the best of it.
I know you've got to get going, Ryan. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll catch up soon.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.